This is The Driver with Alice Powell, sponsored by Bristol Street Motors.
He just looked around and, stormed straight up to me. Now, in these moments, even though I was, younger then, this is kind of when, what you live for. A driver who is so full up of energy and all the rest of it. I got a load of abuse, as did Lewis. He was on the front page of newspapers. The interview was huge. Yeah. And we were both essentially getting death threats. So all you can do in these moments is, I just reached out to him and said, look, we're in this together. I'm not going to apologise for what I asked, and I don't expect you to apologise either to anyone. Certainly not to me. But it was just a very odd situation.
Your time is coming around.
Ready? All good? Ready. It gets a bit hot in here, by the way.
Oh, well. I'm either going to melt or sit in my bra.
I mean, the cameras are rolling.
Gets more viewers.
Welcome to The Driver with me, Alice Powell. This is our third episode so far. And from the number of downloads and feedback that we've been having off social media, it seems that you are all enjoying it as much as we are. Today, I'm joined by my fabulous friend, drumroll, Lee McKenzie. So a little intro to Lee. I'm sure everybody knows who you are, Lee, because you're all over the TV, social media, for all good reasons. Lee is a highly respected broadcast journalist, has been broadcasting and presenting for, I don't know, can I say longer than I've been alive? Maybe, probably not.
Probably not.
Worked across Channel 4, BBC, ITV, Sky Sports, covering some of the biggest news, sporting events across recent times. You're probably best known, though, I would say now, for presenting Formula 1 and chatting to the drivers, asking those difficult questions for Channel 4 and previously the BBC. You've covered almost every series, I would probably say, of motorsports and sports cars and single seats. So that does make it sound like you have been around a long time. She's also well known for presenting international rugby, hosting the European Champions Cup for Channel 4, as well as the Paralympics. And I think we can add presenting Wimbledon and on-court interviews to that list too. So there's pretty much nothing that you haven't done. So welcome, Lee.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to this. Normally I'm asking you questions.
I know. Now we've just sat here.
I don't know if I'm excited or nervous or what. So.
Are you all good? You mentioned you've come back from Scotland.
Yeah, I've had a couple of weeks off, which has been nice, and really did achieve nothing, which was quite nice as well. So, it's kind of the time of year for it, as we can see with our decorations and things. Everyone's just starting to wind down a little bit.
Yeah, it's nice. It's always nice, I think, Christmas. But I find I either get ill or I get bored very quickly. Or both, usually, actually.
But at least there's things to watch on TV. So if you're ill and there's good sort of Christmas movies.
There's things to watch on TV and there's books to read.
Books to read?
There we go. There's books to read. I'm plugging it for you already. Right, so I don't know if you've heard any of the previous podcasts. She has. There you go. She's well trained. We do some icebreaker questions. Okay. So, as you've come back from Scotland, yes. I can imagine. I want you to just to think back. You've reclined the seat. Not too far. I need to see where you're going. Heaters on back. Because it's arm back, fingers, and heaters are on to keep your feet and your toes nice and warm for that long drive. What tune do you put on, or what podcast? Obviously, all bar us. Do you put on favourite song for driving to?
Well, this week, not just this week actually, when I was in America for the Grand Prix, we were obviously working very, very hard, but we just frequented a couple of bars. And it was the same week that Taylor Swift's new album came out. Now, I have never listened, I'd like to make it clear, not for any reason, to a Taylor Swift album, but I quite like this one. So, I listened to a little bit of that. And then I am quite dull, so I listened to the Brain of Britain final this week. And
the Brain of Britain final?
Yeah, it's like a quiz that they do on radio, on BBC Radio. So, So you shouted out all the wrong answers
for
30 minutes and then realised I wouldn't be allowed on to the Brain of Britain. So that was quite depressing. And then I just went back to other podcasts.
Well, maybe if you listen to it enough, then you might,
learn something.
Become Lee McKenzie.
They don't
the
ask
brain
many
of
sports
Britain.
questions. I think that's the problem. But I always like to learn. I like podcasts that sort of help you sort of like surreptitiously learn something. So you don't realize you've done it, but then you kind of like go away and you've got a little nugget of information.
Okay.
So I feel that I need to become more intelligent. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
Very cool. Going away from the driving, if you only had one life jacket and you're on the Titanic and it was sinking, obviously, unfortunately, it's already sank, who would you give it to? Okay, I'm not on the Titanic, so you can't say me because clearly you'd give it to me, but, you know.
Well, not an interesting nugget of information, but when I was at school and university, I used to work as a lifeguard. No. So even though it
so
wasn't in the sea, I probably would think that, you know, I would be fine, even though I would be dead within 3 seconds in the icy waters. But what do you mean? Like, who would I give it to? A child or a specific person?
A specific person.
Well, if I was there with my mum, I would give it to her because she can't swim at all.
Okay.
So
she'd have been good use of it then.
Well, then she'd have a heart attack as soon as she hit the water.
So you just leave.
So maybe I should just keep it for myself. I don't know. I mean, I've never. I'm not sure of all the questions that have ever been posed.
Well, there are some strange questions on this show.
Keep them coming. I'm enjoying
craziest
it.
Craziest rumour you've heard about yourself?
Oh, well, actually, someone had put on Wikipedia, which I do love, the fact that it said I had 3 children, like Hamish, I can't even remember, like 3 Scottish names, and I travelled 100,000 miles around the world on a stagecoach bus. And I have no children. I promise you.
Shut up.
And when I went to change it, it basically locked me out and said, you're not allowed to change information about yourself in case, you know, like, in case you exaggerate it. I was like, yeah, I think it's been exaggerated already. So you can't change your own Wikipedia page.
So I could change your Wikipedia page.
Yeah. I did wonder if it was my brother in the first place.
And reinstate that rumour.
If you touch my Wikipedia page, it could only be 10 times worse.
Here we go. Right, you've got a time machine. Mm-hmm. If you could go back or forward, you know, because I suppose they can go forward, to any sporting event, which one would it be and why?
Well, wouldn't it be fun to go to the first ever Formula One Grand Prix?
Yeah. Was that 52?
I think.
Is it something like that?
Yeah,
well,
and it's actually the only one that a reigning monarch went to. Because I remember when I was doing all the stuff around Queen Elizabeth's death, she'd actually been to the British Grand Prix with her father, and it was the first time that, and the only time that a reigning monarch has attended a Grand Prix. So I think to be at that, thing is, I suppose at that time, nobody knew what Formula One was or what it was going to become. So you don't have that benefit of history and hindsight. But I think it would be so special, even if it wasn't the first, but to see those cars.
Oh, I was just going to say to actually see the cars.
Yeah, and when I've done stuff in, you know, over the last few years with the late Sir Sterling Moss, his stories, the fact they didn't wear belts so they could throw themselves out of the cars and crazy stuff like that, I think that would be amazing to see.
Yeah, it certainly would. I think I'd like to see what Silverstone looked like.
Yeah.
Back then. I mean, because it's changed a lot since I've certainly been in motorsport. So I'd probably say seeing what, just an airfield, I suppose.
Yeah, a wartime airfield.
Yeah. Oh, we need to build one now. Get onto it. Keep listening to that Brain of Britain podcast and you'll have all the brains.
I wasn't allowed to do maths or science at school, so I think I'm quite far away from the time machine.
Bristol Street Motors present the very latest word on the street with the Driver Podcast.
Lee, you've brought your book with you.
Yes.
Which, you know, I'm not a big book person, must be said, but I have nearly finished. I'm at the very end of the Alonso chapter.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So lots of great things in the book. We can talk about that a little bit later. But from reading the book, it talks about how you got into Formula One. And you kind of, I would say, had quite a unique childhood. I mean, very jealous. You were in a lot of around F1 paddocks. But when did you sort of decide, right, this is the career for me? I want to be sort of in the F1 paddock, or was it not necessarily in the F1 paddock? It was more reporting and writing.
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily in the F1 paddock because I had been the annoying child that had missed so much school and everything to go to Rugby World Cups and Formula One, although I tend to go on my school holidays for that. Athletics, everything really, because my father was a Fleet Street journalist. He actually went on to write Nigel Mansell's book at the end of 92 and Damon Hill's book at the end of 96.
Amazing.
So, it's sort of come full circle. But I just thought that when I saw what my father and a lot of other, great writers mostly did, they got paid to go to events that other people would pay money to go to watch. And I was like, well, this seems like a good deal. And then I used to get a Monday morning off school when I was 15. I'd go to rugby on the Saturday and I'd then go Monday morning off school and go and write it up for the local newspaper. So I was actually being published in newspapers from the age of 15 onwards. The first article I had in a national newspaper was in the Daily Express. And I went to Knockhill and did an article on John Cleland. He drove me around. And this was when, John was bossing touring cars. And he drove me around Knockhill. And I did an article on that, and it got published in the Express with a picture of me, which just kind of doesn't happen with journalists and stuff. Yeah. And actually, I still see John. I saw him last year. And I was up with Dario Franchitti and Alan McNish, and we were sort of like taking pictures of his cars, and he put on his social media, great to see 3 fans, the 3 of us. So it was a really strange thing. I always loved cars and loved Formula One, but I just loved sport and what it meant to communities and what it meant to countries when they play together. So
did that interest, you think, come from your dad?
Absolutely. My my own background was horses, and that came from my mother. But just sort of the writing and attending sport came from my father. Yeah.
I mean, you say, but you touch on to your love of horses. In the book, actually, you've done some incredible things, and riding with Michael Schumacher, who's my hero.
Yeah.
I mean, that must have been probably, a memory you're certainly never going to forget. And you touch again on in the book how nervous you were, but was that probably one of the best experiences you've had, sort of, including probably even being at the track?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was so excited when Michael came back to Formula One, because when I had, the only interaction I'd ever had with Michael before that was the A1 GP, which was a motorsport series that lasted, I think, 4 or 5 years. And I used to present that. And Willy Weber, who had been Michael's manager, owned the German team that Nico Hülkenberg actually drove for, and he was managed by Willy as well. When it came to the end of season awards, Michael turned up to these awards, but we were told we weren't allowed to speak to him. He was just going to walk onto stage, and I was like, I'm going to speak to him. I was so excited.
I'd be exactly the same.
And I spoke to him, and he was absolutely lovely. So I don't know who put this rule in. It certainly wasn't Michael. Then when he came back to Formula One, I couldn't believe it. I was, I don't get starstruck or anything like that, but Michael had dominated and really was Formula One in the period of time that I was watching it, as a kid. And to me, he was F1. So I was excited by that. And then not just to be able to interview him, but able to have a good, decent, sort of respectful relationship with him. We used to talk about horses. We talk about lots of random stuff. For whatever reason, he and I seemed to get on, even though I would ask big questions. And I think he quite liked that. It was a bit of a sport. He would reply with a completely different question and answer. And then he said, what about, doing a horse event? And I was like, I'm sorry, what? And cut a long story short, I had never done reining, which is like Western riding. It's like dressage at a gallop with a Stetson and chaps on. I hadn't done it before, but that's what his wife and his daughter Gina Maria still does to this day. And I had to find a lady in the UK to teach me, although I only did 2 hours of lessons. I then took her horse to Switzerland.
I suppose I don't know much about horses. I suppose then you need a bond between the horse, is that how it works?
Well, I don't think there ever was one, but we just cracked on together. And then went to Switzerland, and then the 2 of us just ended up in this competition, and it was just the most surreal couple of days of my life. After the competition, there was this huge party as well, and it was just it was truly lovely. And I just remember standing on this podium, because Michael and I drew, with wearing Stetsons and chaps, and looking around thinking, I don't think I'll ever experience another moment like this.
Amazing.
It was just so special. And he was so giving with his time and welcoming. And even though there was a lot of privacy around the event and, you know, we had to sign like NDAs and things like that, we still did a lovely interview with him, which went out on television on BBC, and we were able to show the event. But it was just great. You know, he was so welcoming.
Yeah.
His entire family. It was really special.
Oh, it's amazing. And would you say that he's probably your favourite driver in Formula One? Out of all the drivers that you've touched on in referring back to your book, so many drivers you've spoken to. Would you say that he is probably your favourite, but just because of the experiences you've had with him?
I think maybe because of the aura that he had around him. I mean, what's different about Michael to, for example, Seb or a Lewis even? You know, I knew these guys when they were a lot younger, before they'd won world championships, whereas I didn't have that with Michael. So he was a great... He wasn't just a guy who wanted to make his way like I was a sort of young reporter who wanted to make her way. And I knew Lewis differently because I knew him in the support series. And wrongly, that takes some of the sparkle or the mystique, I suppose, away because you've known someone for so long. Yeah. So I see Michael in the way that I see a Roger Federer. And it's just like a wow. And, you know, I had a great relationship with Sebastian Vettel. And respect, and you know,
I could see that actually when because I remember we interviewed him together at Baku, and
chaos.
That's actually the word you used to me, because I was like, oh, wow, we're interviewing Vettel, because it's all new to me, obviously, and I said, oh, that's pretty cool, we can be interviewing Vettel, and you said it'll be chaos. And I was like...
And it was. He came and made a joke.
Yeah.
And then was so busy trying to get out of what he said, dropped his sunglasses on the ground. And during my question to him, he's now rummaging around on the ground and then has to jump back up. And it's everything.
Yeah.
But, you know, we have done big interviews together again, but people remember the fun ones where he started to give up my phone number on air, or asked me to wear a red dress, or, you know, stormed out of an interview and then came back because I said I wasn't a Ferrari fan, even though it was a joke. You know, it's silly. And then when I admitted that I used to have 2 goldfish burger and a Lacey, he was like, let me phone your dad. But this is all going out on on television.
He strays off the question a lot. I remember that's one thing I took from interviewing.
But I loved working with Seb. I really did enjoy it. And so, you know, it's hard to sort of say whether Michael had that mystique and aura for me because he'd achieved everything in actual fact before I'd ever met him. So I'd seen him from a distance, whereas a lot of the drivers, I hadn't been there. You sort of know them in the capacity, you know them now.
And least favourite? You're going to have a least favourite, surely.
You
can say me. You can say me.
You're always a dream. You're always a dream. There are some who are more tricky than others. And I think you take people as you find them on that day. I mean, I have no qualms whatsoever if someone has crashed out in a race or not had a good race and then comes over to me and is sort of either rude or short or whatever. That's, you know... They are not there to be... No one picks up a racket or gets in a car with the hope of being interviewed by me. Let's make that clear. They are there because they want to succeed and they want to win and they want to be the best they can be. So I have no problem with a sportsman, woman, athlete, whatever, being upset or pissed off or whatever. To me, that's fine. But if there's no reason for it, then that's not great.
I mean, because you always have to ask the question. I mean, I've been there at times where you go, this is the last thing I want to do is talk to... be interviewed after a pretty rubbish race, but that's a different subject in itself. But in terms of barriers, obviously we've touched on sort of females in sport. We've both been working in paddocks for a long time now. You a little bit longer, but me in the driving side. How have you found it in sort of the TV and the presenting journalism world? Because I still find that walking around a Formula One paddock, there's still not that many female journalists. You know, there's you and there's a few others sort of presenting for TV as well. Have you found that that's changed a lot?
See, I think there's a lot now. In the past, there really wasn't.
See, that's strange that you say that, because I still think that there's not that many.
I think sometimes, and this is probably a fault, that I don't notice it very much. And sometimes I remember putting up a picture and it was like, I don't know, an airport or something. Or maybe it was a flight, in fact, it was a flight. And it was like a whole sea of white guys and me. And my friend was like, wow, is that it? And I was like, what do you mean by that? And I didn't even notice it, because when you're in it, you know what it's like. But also, I'm not the kind of person that's, it's interesting when people ask this question all the time. And maybe I've just been very lucky, but I don't really see that side. And I think that's because my mentality is, I've never woken up in a morning and thought, wow, God, wouldn't it be great if I was the best female to ask a question today? What's the point in that? You're only seeing 50% of the bigger picture. Ideally, I'll be the best person to ask a question today. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. It depends, but I've never limited myself. And maybe that's because my family have never done it, or I've just never been in that situation to do it. But I've never felt limited by being a female, in all honesty.
Yeah, I mean, you've had some tough interviews that you've had to take, but you've also had unintentionally some tough interviews. I think the Lewis Hamilton one springs back to mind, where he says to you, well, maybe it's because I'm black, and obviously that was directed at the stewards, but that must have been a tough sort of time for you, because I can imagine you got, again, you touched on it in the book, but a lot of backlash from all different kinds of fans saying nasty things. I mean, it goes on. Social media is massive now, and it can be a nasty place at times, but that must have been pretty tough. Well,
it was weird at the time. I mean, Lewis had a really unusual race in that he'd been penalised, I think, 3 times. And the driver's steward was my good friend, Alan McNish, who is, a hugely accomplished racing driver, which is what everybody wants a steward to be, ideally, because they know exactly the limits and what can and cannot happen. And it just had been like, there'd been, Lewis and Massa went into the tunnel in Monaco together, and Massa comes out with 3 wheels in his wagon. So there'd been a lot going on. By the time that Lewis came in, he just looked around and, stormed straight up to me. Now, in these moments, even though I was, younger then, this is kind of when, what you live for. A driver who is so full up of energy and all the rest of it. And there are times where you think, gosh, should I save them from themselves? And he just wanted to say it. And he actually said, very tongue-in-cheek, in a reference to Ali G, I said, why do you think you're such a magnet to the stewards? I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm black. Bang. That was it. The stewards then called him back up. And it was discussed, whether he was bringing it into disrepute. He was never found that he was. He explained it was a joke, all the rest of it. I actually felt more sorry for Sylvia Hofer, who at the time was a McLaren PR. She's now at Ferrari, hugely, hugely experienced, probably the best in the business. Yeah. And she was in floods of tears after that. Aww. And that I did feel bad about that. But I got a load of abuse, as did Lewis. He was on the front page of newspapers. The interview was huge. Yeah. And we were both essentially getting death threats. So all you can do in these moments is, I just reached out to him and said, look, we're in this together. I'm not going to apologise for what I asked, and I don't expect you to apologise either to anyone. Certainly not to me. But it was just a very odd situation. And by sticking together, we kind of got through it together, which I think was really important.
Because that's interesting, because you mentioned about the comms PR lady really upset. We talk a lot about mental health for drivers. We've had Lando talk about it this year. We've had, Seb's been his campaign for all different things this year. But I think he probably has touched on maybe mental health. But we forget about, the people that might have tough comments made on social media, because if social media was probably a lot bigger when you did that interview, I can imagine that you probably would have read a lot more nasty messages and, been targeted a bit more. Nothing was your fault. You just simply asked the question. But do you find that needs to be more to be done about sort of the mental health with everybody in the paddock, not just the drivers?
I think it's not just in Formula One. I think it's across the board now. And I always remember when Twitter, for example, started, my father said to me, these are the people that used to write in green pen on spiral-bound notebooks and send it into the office, would take a letter and post it into the office, that now you're all welcoming them into your world.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really interesting time going forward about the preservation of free speech, but also facts checking. I mean, to me, that's the biggest issue, that rumor becomes fact and people retweet things and quote things that just simply are not true.
Yeah.
And that is the biggest fear. And that's not just in sport, that's across the board in news. And I know, for example, like the BBC and ITV try and fact checks every time a politician does a speech. They actually have a whole team of people now just fact checking to see what is right and what is wrong. Because if you only take that on face value, how are you meant to know? And things blow up so quickly. This isn't a new situation, athletes, politicians, everyone have been telling not necessarily lies, but false truths for many, many years. But because of the instant nature of what social media is, that a lie can become a huge supposed truth very, very quickly. And that's what worries me. And that's what really worries me now, in the way that Formula One, in my eyes, has become very tribal, almost like football. Yeah. Instead of just going, wow, Max drove well this weekend, or Lewis drove well this weekend. Well, you can't like both of them. Well, this is madness. Of course you can appreciate both of them. And I really don't like the way that that Formula One has gone in that manner.
Yeah, I mean, Max just seems like one of these drivers that just has the mental strength. Nothing really seems to faze him. So from your point of view, would you say that's probably one of the biggest ingredients to becoming a world champion? I mean, you've seen lots of different champions, you've interviewed lots of different champions in difficult situations. Would you say that's one, or maybe there's something else?
Well, I think Max stands out to me. The first time I met Max was the August at the Belgian Grand Prix, in fact, before he got the full-time drive. So he'd been announced and he was starting in Australia the following year. And I just couldn't believe, like, there was a shyness about him. He was so sort of like...
which surprises me.
Gangly and just young and a little bit like, that way he's just, his Red Bull hoodie was oversized. His cap was oversized, almost like he was hiding. And actually, he probably should be, because on that Thursday, the whole press conference was about whether he was experienced enough to be in Formula One. He was 16 years old. And then I sat down and did this interview with him. And his exact words were, "My life goal since I was 7." I was like, I'm sorry, what? I mean, like, who in their right
has
mind?
Life goals at 7?
I wouldn't have known what a life goal was when I was 7. And he's just been conditioned and brought up and sort of almost produced in that way. But I don't mean that in a sort of like hothouse flower way, where you have like a kid who's being forced to play the piano 20 hours of 24 in a day. First of all, karting is fun. So, it's not a hostage situation here. Jos was very passionate about it, but so was Max. And I was lucky enough to go and spend a couple of days in the Netherlands. Well, actually, it was the Belgian border, with the Verstappen family in his first year of Formula One. And his friends were there, the Pex brothers, who are still his best friends, and they're, world karting champions. And, I went to the Verstappen's karting, I don't know what you would call it. Essentially, you would normally say like a shed or something. It had a dyno, it had everything there. We went to Genk, to the kart track. It was like track. I've Good never track. Ever seen. It was just like so professional. And yet, every single one of them, you could tell it in their eyes, their smiles, their faces, were having so much fun. So whilst Max was in a way produced for this, he was having the time of his life. And he just saw it through different eyes. He has got the steeliest sort of resolution of a person, of an athlete, that I've kind of seen outside. Boxers and people always talk a good game, make a lot of noise, but you're never really sure if they believe it. But with Max, talk isn't cheap. He is meaning every word he says. And it can be unnerving. And I understand why people think it's arrogant. But to me, is it arrogant? I don't know. It's just a belief like I have never seen before.
So he definitely meant every word he said in Brazil, not letting Sergio Perez through.
Yeah, I think there's a bigger backstory there, isn't there? I mean, it'll be interesting to see what comes out. There's now a rumour that the FIA are going to investigate Sergio Perez's crash in Monaco. I think that's where it stems from. But if the FIA choose to go down that route and investigate that, then that could have serious repercussions. But that's what's been reported in newspapers, and the BBC ran a story about it as well. So I don't know. We'll see how it plays out. But there was I don't think he would say something lightly, knowing it goes out on team radio. I mean, drivers know what's going to get played out and what's not going to get played out.
Yeah. Well, we'll wait and see then. We'll watch that with eager eyes.
Bristol Street Motors present the very latest word on the street with the Driver Podcast.
We're talking about Formula 1 drivers. Are we going to see soon a female Formula 1 driver, you think?
Well, it's easy to say I absolutely hope so, and that is a natural response. And with my heart and head, I absolutely hope we do. But, and here's the but, it has got to be, as you know, for the right reasons.
Yeah, not just to tick a box.
You cannot parachute someone into F1. And don't get me wrong, guys have parachuted themselves into F1 through bags of cash for many, many years. But I just think there is such pressure on the female who does turn up in F1 to be good that I'm not saying they have to be superhuman, but they have to be at a standard where they can hold their own, because they know that every crash, every spin, wrongly, because again, guys have been doing that for a very long time, will be analysed. And for me, and I have said this before to you, I know, but we just need to sort of flood the grassroots, great, and then get to the next stage. And then there's a dropout at the age of around 14 across all women's sport. Doesn't matter what the sport is. You've got to hold these girls that start to get a little bit distracted, whether it be through, homework or just life in general, bodies changing, aspirations changing. That is the time where females across all sport, particularly in motorsport, have to be held in. And I think by the sounds of that is going to come through the new programs that the FIA are putting into place, or F1 is putting into place. And that would be great, because that's the time that, you lose a lot of talent. Yeah, no, you certainly do. But we could have... You're a racing driver yourself. Well, I'm an average co-driver, and actually I have driven round Silverstone with you in the passenger seat beside me, so I'm not a racing driver.
It was good. I think that, there's things that we could have work on, but it's fine. We can build you up, Lee. But
I've got always across the board in my life, I have much more enthusiasm than ability. I think generally.
No, it was fine. I enjoyed it. I loved the filming. But co-driver, I think how did you get into that? I mean, personally, I wouldn't be able to do it because I cannot read whilst driving along, being sat in a passenger seat.
Well, neither could I. I was car sick going from 100 metres. But then in that situation, I was fine. I was really nervous about it. I was doing a programme on ITV at the time, and they came up with this idea that I would attempt to get my licence to compete in the British round of the World Rally Championship, but as a co-driver in Group N. So I had to do, first of all, you have to go and get your license and all the rest of it. And then, it's the same as your, I don't know if it's so called, like an ARDS test. So you have to drive, you have to show capabilities on a racetrack, all the rest of it in case your driver... I passed,
Joking.
And then...
talents decline maybe.
Exactly. I think they've probably made it a little bit harder since I came through the ranks. But then I went off and did 3 rounds of the British Championship and then qualified for the WRC, or at that level of the WRC. And then the following year we went to Norway, and I trained at John Hoglan's, who was a great rally driver. And I trained in Norway on a frozen lake in his car, and it was just fantastic. But there were so many crazy great moments. I also had a lot of help from people like Robert Reid, who was Richard Byrne's co-driver. And the incredible Michael Park, who sadly isn't with us now, but just a lot of help from some of the best World
Best
Rally
teachers.
co-drivers out there.
Amazing.
And also because I am quite organised, a little bit sort of control freakish and things, that played quite well into my hands. I was better than people thought, but I could never obviously have done it, as a career. But then I did have to get my licence back this year when I was presenting Goodwood Festival of Speed for ITV. I thought there was a thing, it just like said rally section, and they were like, what do you want to do in the rally section? I said, well, I want to present that part of it on the super special. And they were like, what do you mean? And I said, well, rather than me standing beside it, I think what would be quite fun is could I present it from the car? And they were like, well, probably not. So I decided that's what I really wanted to do. And then I went up to the rally stage, and it was all the same people in charge. And they were like, do you have your license? I said, I need to get in this car to present the programme. They were like, okay, what's your license? And I hadn't had an active license for a few years. I was like, oh, damn, I've forgotten it. And they were just like, knew I was lying. They were like, hand over the money, we'll give you the license. So I had to like reapply and go through all, and then we did it. Mega. So I do have a current license that's ready to be used if anyone.
We're touting out there. If anyone wants a co-rally driver.
Well, actually, I was sitting beside Jade Pavley, who is incredible, like female driver. I shouldn't say female driver, but she's really talented, and it was great to be alongside her and her father. I actually had to wear her dad's race suit because I turned up with nothing. Literally turned up with nothing. I didn't have a helmet, hands device,
I had a
race suit. I know. So basically, I was wandering around with Jade whilst wearing her father's clothes, which was a bit odd. But yeah, they were so welcoming, and they did say like, if you want to jump in, like let us know.
I feel like rally is one of those that you can crash quite easily.
Yeah.
And I would struggle by not. You mentioned about being in control. You're not in control when you're sat near it.
But the driver has the win situation, obviously, because they can steer themselves out of trouble, which is why there's a lot of co-driver injuries, because the natural reaction for a driver is like, no, thank you. So I broke my collarbone. We did have quite a big crash actually in Wales. But it was quite funny because there were also we crashed somewhere we shouldn't, there were no cameras there to see us. But we basically just flew straight on and ended up on top of a log pile. And my driver was like, "Get out and push, darling." I was like, what are you talking about? And you have to change. And when you're the co-driver, you spend a lot of time, because it's my responsibility or the co-driver's responsibility to, change the tire, change the wheel. But these are huge steel things. So I was just looking at this. So I found like some little, like the average age was probably about 95 of the 3 Welshmen that I discovered. And I made them sprint like half a mile along the road. And I was like, come on, push, guys. And they were just terrified. We did get the car off the log pile, and then we had to change the tire and off we went. But yeah.
With a broken collarbone?
Well, I didn't know I'd broken it at that point. I think the adrenaline was going quite hard. So, but the belts, because you got the 5-point belts on, so you're so like tightly packed in that that's the first thing. Jockeys break their collarbones. We fall off horses all the time. Everyone's breaking collarbones.
Yeah, that's one thing that sort of puts me off horses, because we had this discussion before coming on about Lee absolutely loves dogs, loves horses, but you hate cats. I remember being at Baku this year. We sat down, after a long day at the track. We're like, oh, okay, we'll have a few cocktails. It's quite warm outside. I didn't even realise you were scared of the cats at this point.
I'm not sure if I realised I was scared of cats at this point, but when someone is luring cats over to join the cocktail party, I realised at that moment I was scared of cats.
So this cat is like, I saw it in the bush and you were sat behind it, in front of this cat. And I'm like, oh, look, you're not concentrating at this point, more interested in your lovely cocktail you were drinking. And I'm like, come on, little cat. And out from the bush comes this tiny, honestly, it was probably about this big. It was a tiny little cat. It
was.
And Lee, you spot this cat. I've never seen you move so quickly.
If that cat had chased me around on my track run a few hours before that, I would have broken some sort of record. That night,
so,
I was slow. You were quick. If I'd been chased by the cat, I would have been much quicker. I think as well, it was a scrawny.
It was cute.
No.
Oh, so I thought there was like something wrong with you, like you needed some Imodium or something like that, and you had to rush to the toilet. But no, it was this tiny little cat that was just wanting some love and attention.
No love for cats.
But you say you don't like them because you can't, they do weird stuff. So do horses. You talk about how you've fallen off horses loads of times.
Yeah, horses are a bit strong-willed, and when you fall off a horse, it's going to hurt. I would say that.
Yeah,
I have had
that's not going to hurt you.
Yeah, but you have to work hard for their affection. I like the shallow love of a dog.
Okay, right. Well, there's no mention of cats in this book. In the book, where did you get the idea to write a book from?
I'd been asked to write an article about Lewis and knowing him for sort of such a long time. And then when I got to the end of that, it was obviously a lot shorter. It was maybe like just a few thousand words. And then I thought, I wonder if I could have done this for other drivers as well. And then I'd been asked to write a book about myself. I never ever wanted to because I'm quite private. I don't ever, I do a job. I'm not like a sort of like a main attraction. These guys are the main attraction in this book. When you go to an event, if you're driving or someone's playing rugby or playing tennis, you're all the main attraction because that's how it should be. So I always said no to writing something about me, but this uses all my old interviews to take you through the careers of the drivers because ultimately that's what it's about. And it's so popular, Formula One just now. But actually, if you only look into it through programs that are on television just now, you rarely get a backstory. Yeah. You rarely understand why, if Fernando wins a race next year or a championship, it would be so special because he had the world at his feet. He won 2005, 2006, and then what? I mean, it's not been a lost cause, but he's not won another title. I just
can't believe he hasn't
8 points away from being a 5-time world champion. When I was writing about Fernando, I was getting so sort of like keyed up because it's been a roller coaster.
On that chapter
it's
in your
just
book now.
Exhausting, and he squares things off so well. I've asked him about it loads, but if you are a new Formula One fan, you wouldn't appreciate everything that Fernando has gone through. You might not appreciate that Seb was a 4-time world champion and then struggled from then on. You might just see the person that he is now. Now, the person that he is now is fantastic. But at the same time, he's had a tough time since end of 2013. So you've got to appreciate the athletes that we have now. You've got to know where they came from.
So you're going to have to write another one in another 10, 15 years' time.
Well, what's interesting is I'm not sure if I could because when Fernando started, when Jensen started, Michael started, there was no social media. So you didn't get a flavour of who these guys were. That's why there was a mystique. That's why there was a little bit of mystery. But now with behind-the-scenes documentaries and them being able to own their narrative as well on social media, everything's out there. So I'm not sure if I would be able to write this.
I quite like the personal stories that you write in the book with the drivers, like going with Michael to the ranch, going to Alonso's hometown, all these kind of stories in the book. And maybe we get them from social media, But there's no time for drivers to do that anymore. 24 races next year. You can imagine if I said, you know what, it'd be really nice. I'm just going to pop to your house for 2 days in between the races. They'd be like, no, thank you. The last thing I want to do is see you any more than I already have to. Whereas it was actually much, much easier to do when there was, say, 18 races. There was a lot more time. Even just taking 6 out of a calendar makes a massive difference for the amount of time that drivers and everyone in Formula One has at home. Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned there that Formula One has increased in popularity. Why is that? Do you think it's down to social media and we've got this drive to survive, we've got all different kinds of documentaries? Do you think that's probably the main reason?
Yeah, I do. I think...
or last year, Abu Dhabi, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, I think a few things. I think everything seems to be more popular just now. And I think that 2020 and COVID and half of 21 sort of really deprived people of living the life that they want to live. So therefore, every gig you want to go to, every sport event you want to go to, everything gets sold out because people want to leave their homes. Now that might change with, all the financial stress that there is for people at the moment. That will be interesting to see if that impacts on Formula One. But traditionally, Formula One has always attracted sort of your high earners and your big sponsors. So they might get away with it more than, say, some other sports and businesses. But I definitely think that Drive to Survive has made a difference. I still find it interesting that people come up up to me and go, "Oh, I love Drive to Survive. Do you work in Formula One?" It's like, "Yeah, I love Formula One." "Okay. Did you watch the race this weekend?" No, I just watched Drive to Survive." And I'm thinking, well, that's a bit odd. but and the other thing
you
is,
can't do much comparison, can you, with Drive to Survive?
and I also wonder what will happen, because they're doing obviously one in tennis just now. They're doing one in golf. Are these F1 fans real true F1 fans, or when they watch the tennis one, will they all be massive tennis fans instead? I don't know how transient they are, because it's not an experiment. They're hugely successful programs, but we don't really know about the type of people who have bought into them. Have they bought into it for the year that they're watching? Will they stop watching if Daniel Ricciardo is not in it next year? You just don't really know. I'm not sure if it's lifelong fans in the way that we've had lifelong fans. I mean, interestingly, Silverstone said to me this year, I think that 80% or so of the people who were in the grandstands at Silverstone this year were new.
Really?
And I think you could feel that.
Wow.
You could feel it. You could see it. When you drove out at night, you certainly saw it. It was like being at a Christmas party or something. It was very, very different. But I do think you must attract new fans, but you can't lose the ones who are there, because when it's good, when it's bad, sitting in the rain in an FP1 when no one wants to go out because they don't want to waste their tyres, they're the people you need. Yeah, because they come time on time again.
Yeah, and you think that's probably, you can touch on to my next question. I don't know how it would time, but my personal opinion, what would you change about F1? I mean, that's probably one thing I would try and change, is just make it a bit more accessible for those fans that we might end up sort of pricing out of coming to race weekends. I saw the ticket prices for the Las Vegas race next year. I mean, that's ridiculous. Not a normal fan who you mentioned that would sit in the grandstand in the pouring rain. No way can they afford those prices. I think, what is it, £500 per day or something? Yeah, but think of that.
It's like, how do you get there and the hotel rooms? I know someone, I was chatting to him in Austin, and he owns NASCAR teams and other teams in the States. He is a very wealthy man. He doesn't really need to be concerned about the price of hotel rooms. And on point of principle, he said that he will not be paying for the hotel room costs in Vegas. Now, that's the problem when you go somewhere like that. It's going to be such that, F1 owns the city that weekend, so it is a captive market. Whereas when you go to Barcelona or something, there is so much more going on in the city that you don't really get that massive price hike, because it's a city with 10 other great events going on at the same time. I personally would, for me, all this talk of sustainability and everything is excellent, much needed, all the rest of it. Why, in that case, are we going from Europe to Canada to Europe? Yeah. Why are we going to Australia for a standalone race? Why on earth are we bouncing to Qatar and then to the States and then back? That is just the easiest thing, the most difficult thing, obviously, but the easiest thing to sort out in my eyes, because
I agree.
It's a nonsense. It's an absolute nonsense, not just for the sustainability conversation, but also for the time zones for people. I mean,
those flights are horrible.
Even the Brazil to Abu Dhabi one, and this sounds like a first world problem. There's nothing worse than people who work in Formula One moaning about, oh my gosh, I'm so tired for working in Formula One. And I apologise. I know that people who are watching this are like, okay, come and live my life. And I get that. And also I can say this because I didn't do it, but people who did that sort of 15-hour flight, 7,500 miles from Brazil to Abu Dhabi, and had to go to work the next day. And I'm talking about the guys on the ground, the guys and girls who are on the ground working hard, not the ones that are flying up the front of the plane and having a lovely time and, having a couple of days holiday in between. They don't get holiday. They don't get any time. And I sort of fear for that. I fear for the people who are working day in, day out in Formula One, building the cars, making things happen, working for the teams. The turnover of staff is already pretty huge, and I think it's only going to be much, much greater next year.
Yeah, I mean, I can only just about manage to survive an 8-hour flight, but I know several people that on the flights that had to do that sort of Baku trip, and yeah, a lot of them end up, and they're lifting great big tyres and everything. A lot of them start to get backaches, back problems.
They can't sleep, they can't recover, they're jet lagged. And I really fear for, we talked about mental health, but also general health. of people in these jobs when you have that. You almost need two teams.
Yeah, exactly.
Bristol Street Motors present the very latest word on the street with the Driver Podcast.
What's next for you, Lee? What are you going to be doing next? When are we next seeing you on the TV screen so I can set record?
I'm doing a cat show, actually. No, I'm not. I'm doing
imagine. I actually think...
I'm doing the London International Horse Show. Which,
I've got a cat here.
which I do for them, and I also do for BBC. And then I suppose my next big focus will be on Six Nations rugby.
Yeah, it's
which
that
is
time
coming.
of year again
so
soon,
after
isn't
Christmas,
it?
we sort of like flip onto that.
Who do we fancy for that? I mean, I touch in and out of rugby. It must be said.
I think Ireland.
Really? So I'm half Irish, so I half win.
I can see Ireland from my house in Scotland, so I'll take that as well. I'll just take it.
So you're just going to
take
say,
any tenuous
yeah, no, Ireland won, so yeah, I won technically. Nice. Plans for Christmas?
Going home to Scotland, which will be lovely.
Getting stuck in the snow.
Well, we live right on the beach, so sadly we don't really get much snow. But yeah, a bit of horse riding. You're welcome to come and join me. I know you love horses. And then
you're going to have to lead me along. Put me on a donkey. I'll be right on a donkey. Can I sit on a donkey?
It's very festive.
Yeah,
leading
it is.
you
Look, I can have a little
to the
hat
end
on it and everything.
But yeah, just a really chill time. Sort of like get ready, because it's also the shortest break before F1 starts again that we've had for a long time. Before we know it, you and I will be sitting on a plane moaning about being jet lagged.
Yes, we will, and then to be like, we can't sleep. Well, we got you a Christmas present. The team did.
Thank you.
I don't really actually know what it is.
Can I open it now?
Yeah, you can open it now.
Hope it's not my book. That'd be hugely depressing.
Why would you not want to read your book? How many times have you read your book?
Oh gosh, so many times. And then I had to read the audiobook. Can you imagine hearing yourself droning on for days? I suddenly understood what it's like for everybody else who listens to me on camera. So
no, you're fine.
No, this is exciting. Oh no! Mum, I've got your present.
There we go.
There we go.
Well, yours didn't have a hard case on that you brought with you, so you know you've got a hard case.
That is good, actually.
Anyone that hasn't got the book, I am not a big book person, but must be said, I definitely really enjoyed reading your book.
I was very pleased that you actually read it on a beach, because I thought that was like huge dedication. You should have been reading some sort of... I actually called it out as chick lit for racing drivers, because normally when people sit on a beach, it's with a cocktail and some sort of trashy novel, and here you were.
I had Lee's book on holiday and I loved it. I love it. So if you haven't got it, what you're doing, you need it for Christmas. We'll pull a cracker. I always lose with these, so you're probably going to win. Yeah, there we go. Always lose.
Should we get the joke?
Let's get the joke. Go on, tell the joke.
Oh.
Are these crackers? Do you not even get toys anymore? It's like those little Kinder eggs. I don't get them anymore because the toys are too small.
There's lots of jokes. Okay. Why did the oyster leave the party early?
I don't know. But clearly it's hilarious.
It is. I quite like this. Because he pulled a muscle. I only know totally inappropriate jokes. I'm going to file this and use it when people say, can you tell me a joke? And I have another thing. What does IPA stand for? International Pale Ale, Insider's Pale Ale, Independent Pale Ale, or Indian Pale Ale? I feel I'm on the brain of Britain.
Oh my days. There we go. These are intelligent crackers. They must be from that podcast. Now we're the brightest podcast with all our jokes and our pale ale. There is a lot in there.
Yeah. There's a lot. I mean...
We're going to be here all day.
Yeah. We're going to have the time of my life.
Including jokes. We've covered so much today, Lee. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much
for coming on. Have a great Christmas.
You too.
I'll be seeing you. Well, I'm sure when you're back from Scotland, we'll have a catch up. Anyway, so thanks so much for coming on.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Alice.
Enjoy reading your book.
I can't wait.
And thank you everyone for listening. And don't forget to download and subscribe. And we'll see you on the next episode of The Driver.